All right, and we are back live, and we are talking Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial. The trial has ended. It has gone to the jury now. It is up to the jury what happens in this case. Um, like I've said before, they had yesterday off, they have today off, they have tomorrow off. They are back on Tuesday. And I don't expect a result probably until Wednesday or Thursday. Okay. But so we left off, we finished Johnny's side's closing arguments. So I want to do, let me share my screen here. I want to do Amber's side's closing arguments, and we will watch it together and then we will react to it together. And let me just put this over here for myself. You guys don't see what I'm doing, sorry, but it just makes it easier for me. Okay, let me make this a little bit bigger. Let's see if we can get it to be, oh, okay. Oh, I see. Let's get it to be as big as possible. Bigger? No, that's it. That's the biggest it's gonna get. Okay. All right. So here we go. So we are gonna watch now Amber's side do their closing arguments. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone.
Mr. Wetmore, is your mic on?
I believe it is.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Does that work? Okay. In trying to convince you that Mr. Depp has carried his burden of proof in proving that he was never abusive to Amber on even one occasion, think about the message that Mr. Depp and his attorneys are sending to Amber, and by extension to every victim of domestic abuse everywhere. If you didn't take pictures, it didn't happen. If you did take pictures, they're fake. If you didn't tell your friends, you're lying. And if you did tell your friends, they're part of the hoax. If you didn't seek medical treatment, you weren't injured. If you did seek medical treatment, you're crazy. If you do everything that you can to help your spouse, the person that you love.
Sorry about that, guys. I actually had a phone call that I had to take.
Alcohol abuse.
Okay, here we go.
Spins him into an abusive, rage-filled monster. You're a nag. And if you finally decide that enough is enough,
it's always the monster, the monster.
Fear, enough of the pain, and you have to leave to save yourself, you're a gold digger. That is the message that Mr. Depp is asking you to send. But he doesn't stop there, because in Mr. Depp's world, you don't leave Mr. Depp. And if you do, he will start a campaign of global humiliation against you, a smear campaign that lasts to this very day. He will do everything he can to destroy your life, to destroy your career. That is what they're saying, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what they're trying to get you.
Okay, Rottenborn. Anyway, I just wanted to also say again a shout out to the Law and Crime YouTube channel. I got their videos this time because I like that they show the multiple angles.
Just as Ms. Vasquez did, and Mr. Chu did, I would like to extend my thanks to you on behalf of Amber and our whole legal team for the care and the diligence with which you have served as jurors in this matter. You've paid attention to every witness, every piece of evidence, and I can't even imagine the sacrifice that you've made in terms of time away from your friends, your family, your job to be here on this jury. It's a very important role that you're serving, and we thank you very much. Let's pick up where we started 6 weeks ago in opening statement. You may remember that I asked you to keep a simple question in mind, which is, why are you here? And much of what you've heard during the course of this trial, you don't need to make a decision on in order to return a verdict for Ms. Heard on Mr. Depp's claim of defamation. Now, we'll talk about Ms. Heard's claim of defamation against Mr. Depp, and Elaine will address most of that in a few minutes. But your key question to answer is, does the First Amendment give Ms. Heard the right to write the words that she wrote in this article on December 18th, 2018? That's the question. And you cannot simultaneously protect and uphold the First Amendment and find in favor of Johnny Depp on his claim. You simply cannot. You have to decide, should someone be able to write an article like that in the United States of America without being sued successfully, without having to go through the hell that Ms. Heard has gone through? So let's talk about that. And to do that, we get to explain a bit more about the law that you have to follow. This is the op-ed piece. I'm not going to read it to you again. You heard me read it to you in opening statements. And I would urge you, when you're in the deliberation room, read it. Read it again. And I know we focused on it, here and there over the course of the trial, but the vast majority of the trial has not focused on these words, on this piece. This is obviously the paper edition. There's the online edition as well. Now we get a chance to discuss with you exactly what you have to find about this article. Let's try this again. This is one of the jury instructions that you'll get. And I've been so looking forward to being able to actually explain to you, as the judge read all the instructions to you this morning, and I know it was a lot, but we've been looking forward to being able to explain to you what you're here to decide. Because I imagine for some of the case, it's been kind of unclear. What are you being asked to decide? These are the things that you have to find, and you have to answer yes. As Mr. Chu said, you have to answer yes to all of them in order to find in favor of Mr. Depp. So you have to find that the statement was about Mr. Depp, and you can decide that in the context of the article. And I'll get to the arguments that Mr. Depp raises on that in a minute.
Hello and welcome if you are watching.
You also have to find that the statement is false.
Join the chat.
And we're going to look at the statements here. We're going to look at each of the three statements. And in order to win his claim, Mr. Depp has to prove every single element. And there's a concept in the jury instructions that you really didn't hear.
He's going
from
through
Mr.
the
Depp's side
jury instructions.
but you've all heard
right
it,
now.
I'm sure, outside the courtroom, which is burden of proof. Does Mr. Depp
Johnny side waited till the
each and every one of these elements?
Amber side is in the
If
beginning.
he cannot, Ms. Heard,
If you would like to join me on screen so we can have a
if he
discussion
cannot
about this
prove each
case,
and every
you
one
can
of
click
these
the link.
elements under
It's
the
very
burden
easy.
of
It's
proof that's
StreamYard.
applicable, Ms.
You don't
Heard
have to show your
wins.
face. You can
There's
go on
two different
avatar
burdens
just
of
like me
proof that
right
we'll get
now.
to. For all of
Or
them,
you can
except
show your
number
face like me
7,
right now.
the burden of proof is
But
greater
yeah.
weight of the evidence.
Welcome.
So you weigh the evidence and you decide, has Mr. Depp proven
Hello
to
and
you
welcome.
the first 6 elements?
Join me on
The
screen if you would like to
seventh
talk.
one, evidence standard,
If you are
we'll
just
get to in a few
passionate about it
minutes.
as I am,
But this is what he has
make
to
sure
prove.
you hit that like button and
And he
please
cannot do that.
subscribe.
These are the 3 statements. And I know you may be thinking to yourself, wait a second, don't we have to decide if Mr. Depp committed abuse? And the answer is no, you don't have to. Because these 3 statements, you can decide as a matter of law, or
See,
as
this
a
is
matter of
why
fact,
I like the
as
Law
you
and
weigh the
Crime
evidence and
channel
the facts
videos
that
because
they're
they show
true.
you the
So the
multiple
first 2
angles.
statements I'm going to address together.
It's good
Then
to
2
see.
years
Like,
ago,
look at
I
Amber's
became a
face.
public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out. Number 2, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse. When you go back to the jury room to deliberate, you should feel free, like I said, to read the article and think of the article's
Make
purpose.
sure you
The
hit
jury
that
instructions also
like
tell you
button,
to take
please.
these
If you are
statements in the
watching,
context
it
of the
really
article.
helps.
Think about the purpose.
And join the
The purpose
chat.
of
Join
the
me on
article was to
screen.
promote legislative measures designed to protect victims of domestic abuse, designed to protect people who did exactly what Ms. Heard did, to speak out. That's apparent on the face of the article. And to do that, Ms. Heard talked about her own life experiences as someone who had obtained a TRO against Mr. Depp, someone who had accused Mr. Depp of domestic violence. Make no mistake, and Mr. Depp's side keeps trying to say that we're somehow suggesting that 2 years before she wrote this, that Ms. Heard hadn't had anything to do with Mr. Depp. We're not saying that. You heard Ms. Heard herself say Of course, 2 years before I wrote this article,
it's so frustrating.
I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out after she obtained a temporary restraining order against Mr. Depp, after she became a public figure representing domestic abuse. But the words that she wrote here, and then chronicling her own experience after that, those words are true. Those words are true. Similarly, the rare vantage point of seeing, based on her own experiences post May 27th, 2016, how institutions protect men accused of abuse, those words are true, and the First Amendment protects Ms. Heard's right to say them. Now, the third statement is absolutely true as well, but we're going to take that separately because she didn't write it. Under the First Amendment, the statements have to be false in order for Mr. Depp to win. Now, plaintiff addresses, like I said, an argument that we're not making. And as I said, we're not running from the fact that when she discussed becoming a public figure representing domestic abuse, Amber was speaking of her experiences reporting domestic abuse against Johnny Depp. She admitted to that, but that doesn't make the article or the statements about Johnny Depp. Think about it. Think about every piece of evidence that you've heard over the last 6 weeks about his abuse, about their relationship. None of that is in the article. None of it. We all know that it would be a very different article if she had written about what she suffered, that she's told you about over the last 6 weeks. Because he knows the words are true, Mr. Depp says that the words now have a defamatory implication. He says the statements are the same as saying, Johnny Depp abused me. But just because he wants to make the article about himself doesn't mean it is. He has to show you that any defamatory implication was designed and intended. Look at number 4, designed and intended by Ms. Heard to convey the defamatory meaning that he suggests. Just because people might read the article and remember, oh yeah, Amber Heard used to be married to Johnny Depp and she accused him of abuse, that doesn't mean that she designed and intended defamatory implications in writing about herself. And think about it. If Mr. Depp is right, then virtually any statement that anyone could ever make about their own life that implies anything.
I just want to say something just for the record, just so sorry about that. Just so it's in this video and it's on the record. Like, I find it very interesting that literally almost basically nobody's watching this video right now. It's live. It's hashtagged under Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. It's hashtagged under all the hashtags. I just find it very interesting. Like, and it's been put out there that YouTube is kind of suppressing a lot of these videos. I don't know. Look, I'm just saying allegedly. I don't know. But I just find it really suspect because a lot of people are interested in this case. And I just find it really weird that barely anybody's watching. Nobody's watching right now, basically. So anyway, just want that on the record in the video. So here we go.
It implies any involvement with any other person could be defamatory. And that's clearly not what the First Amendment intends. She didn't design and intend the words to be the equivalent of writing Johnny Depp abused me. And you don't have to take her words for it. You can take the words of Terrence Doherty of the ACLU. He said that the op-ed wasn't even Ms. Heard's idea. The ACLU wrote the first draft, and great care was taken in drafting the article so as not to make it about Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard's relationship with him. That's the only evidence presented about Ms. Heard's motive, except her statements that was exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to talk about her experiences after Johnny Depp. She wanted to own her story after Johnny Depp and fit those into what other women experience, what other people experience having accused someone of domestic abuse and the backlash that they suffer, and then talk about legislative measures that could help protect people in those positions. That's what she meant, and that's what the article is about. There's no hidden meaning here, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't a hit piece on Johnny Depp. This isn't a hit piece on Johnny Depp. And you can end here. You can end there by saying the statements that she wrote were not false and the First Amendment protects them. Let's talk about the headline for a minute. The headline that was published in the online version only of the article on December 18th, 2018 said, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. A few points here. Number one, and this evidence is undisputed. There's no dispute about this. So as you weigh the evidence, you don't have to
Hello,
check
if
your
you
common
just started
sense at the door.
watching,
And you
join
can
the
weigh
chat. Make sure you
circumstantial
smash
evidence.
that like button
You
and
can weigh
subscribe
facts,
down
but
below,
you can't
please.
see evidence where no evidence exists. And the undisputed evidence here is that Ms. Heard didn't write the headline. She didn't approve the headline. She had nothing to do with it. She was not given notice of the headline. She testified, you saw her testify about the sexual assault that she experienced at the hands of Mr. Depp. You saw her testify about that, but they're calling her a liar. You saw her on the stand testify with your own mouth, with her own mouth, exactly what she went through for the first time in court, because people who have suffered that, they don't want to broadcast that to the world. They want to penalize Ms. Heard for not speaking about that earlier. That's ridiculous, and it's insulting, and it's just victim blaming at its most disgusting. The only reference to sexual assault in the article, and you can read the op-ed, is sexual assault that she said she had experienced by the time she was of college age, before Mr. Depp. So there is a reference to sexual violence in that article, but it's not by Mr. Depp. And Mr. Depp can't hold her liable for a headline she didn't write that contained something that had nothing, that was not about him. And they want you to think that she republished the headline.
She did write it, and she did republish it with the tweet.
The online version. So let's look at
What the fuck?
This is the tweet that she sent on December 19th. The hyperlink says, opinion, Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence. That's the online version of the article.
Oh, wow,
Ms. Heard
they're
said,
showing
"You
the
can't
tweet
attach,
right
you can't
now."
tweet a piece of paper. So when she wanted
we have a long ways
to share
to
that
go
she had written this article, what choice does she have?
Closing arguments.
She has to attach that link. And the jury instructions that you have make clear that
it's all about the
hyperlink
jury
is
instructions.
not
It's all about
republication.
that paper.
Forwarding a link on does not mean that you broadcast the statement again, but that's what they want to make you think. The only way, and the jury instructions that you have, and we don't need to read through them in detail now, but the republication instruction says that merely linking to an article does not amount to republication, but adding content to a linked article may constitute republication. You must determine whether any added content was intended to reach a new audience. And if you find any content added to the hyperlink was intended to reach a new audience, it constitutes a republication. There was no content added to the article. She tweeted above the article simply saying, today I published this. That's what she said. She didn't add any content to it. She could have added some of the content that you've heard in this courtroom to it. She could have said, not only did 2 years ago I become a public figure representing domestic abuse, but let me tell you about the domestic abuse that I suffered. That would be adding new content. This is not adding new content. But I guess it's no surprise, because this whole case is about blaming Amber Heard for things she didn't do. But that's what Mr. Depp does. It's what he's always done. Blame other people, refuse to take accountability. But the problem for him here is that he's running headlong into the United States Constitution, which says that you cannot hold Amber Heard liable for words she didn't write or publish. But here we are. Here we are. And you can decide this case without ever wading into any of the allegations, the facts, the evidence that you've heard about the heinous abuse that Ms. Heard suffered at the hands of Mr. Depp. You can decide that by determining that those statements are true and they're protected by the First Amendment. But Mr. Depp brought this case, and he's suggesting that he was never abusive to Ms. Heard. So if that's where you want to make your decision, that's where the road ends for Mr. Depp. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very clear.
Rottenborn.
If Amber was abused by Mr. Depp even one time, then she wins. One time. And we're not just talking about physical abuse. We're talking about emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse.
Oh, I hope everyone knows
abuse.
and sees what he's doing here.
That's what we're talking about. Let's look at the evidence.
Okay,
you heard
Let's
Mr.
pause this. He is actually referring to, all of the evidence that they have heard and seen, the videos, all the audio that they have heard. They're basically saying if Amber suffered any kind of abuse, so if Johnny acted, talked any kind of way to her, emotional abuse, whatever, that would count. So yeah, that's what they're doing there.
Depp define abuse from his own mouth. He admitted all of that when he talked about his childhood. As they reference, his mother called him one eye because he had a lazy eye. And he said that that was worse than the beatings that he took. Worse than the beatings that he took. Being called one eye by his mother was worse than the beatings that he took. And after the evidence that you've seen, some of which you're going to see, I want you to think to yourself, is being called one eye worse than what he did to Miss Heard? Absolutely not. You'll remember his expert, Shannon Curry, agreed with all that abuse can take many forms. And you'll remember that Don Hughes, Miss Heard's expert, talked about the reports of intimate partner violence by Miss Heard, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors. She tested Miss Heard. She said that the tests show that there's a high degree of serious violence perpetrated by Mr. Depp toward Miss Heard. She got that opinion and that impression by reviewing the medical records of Miss Heard. She talked about the role of coercive control that Mr. Depp exercised over Miss Heard. The effect of coercive control, she said, was drastic, and it was composed of things such as possessive jealousy, the imbalance of power, not only in physical stature and physical size, but in where they were in their life and their career, by intimidation. She said writing obscene messages to your partner can absolutely be intimidating behavior. She said that Mr. Depp, after reviewing the evidence, banging and throwing and hitting things in the household, that's psychological aggression.
See, I told
Punching
you.
A wall, throwing something, screaming, that
anything
is abuse.
that is considered
That's
abuse.
ladies and gentlemen.
That's what he's trying to do.
She said alcohol
He's
can
trying to
just
make
throw
everything
lighter fluid
be
off a
basically
flame in a
considered abuse.
situation of domestic violence. All of these things constitute the domestic violence that Miss Heard suffered at the hands of Mr. Depp. And he's trying to get you
Hello
to
and
fool
welcome.
you
If you've
to
just
believing
joined,
that he's
please
carried
hit the
his
like
burden of
button,
proof
hit
that never a
subscribe,
single
join
time
the
in their
chat, and you
relationship
can also
was he
click
in
the
any
link that is
way,
pinned to the
physically or
top of
not
the
physically
chat
abusive to
to
Miss
join
Heard.
me
And
on
that's ridiculous.
screen.
That's ridiculous. So let's look at some of that evidence. And like I said, you can apply your own common sense. You don't need to check that at the door when you go into the deliberation room. I'm going to walk you through the evidence, some of the evidence that's been presented, including evidence from Mr. Depp's own mouth, his own words, or the words of his witnesses. Keep in mind the burden of proof. And as we go through this evidence, I'd ask you to keep this in mind as well.
Hello
it's not
and
about
welcome.
who's the
If
better
you are
spouse.
just joining,
It's not about
join
whether
the
you think
chat.
Miss Heard may have been
Smash
abusive to
that
Mr.
like
Depp.
button,
It's
hit the
not.
subscribe
Because
button
remember, if you
below.
think that they were
And
both
also, you
abusive
can
to
join
each
me
other,
on screen
that's
if you would
what their
like to
witness,
talk
Laurel
about this
Anderson,
case.
testified to.
I will pause what we are doing and we can have a discussion. Let's talk about the case. Join me on screen. Click that link. It's StreamYard.
Then Amber wins. They're trying to trick you into thinking that Amber has to be perfect in order to win, even while they're ignoring Mr. Depp's many flaws. But don't fall for that trick. Amber's not perfect. None of us are. She's never pretended to be, and that's not what you're being asked to decide.
You can go on Avatar like I am right
One
now,
time,
or
ladies
you
and
can go
gentlemen.
on screen like
One
I am
time.
right now. Either
If he
one,
abused her
it's
one
completely
time,
up to
Amber
you.
wins.
Join me on screen. Click the
Actually,
link
if he fails
that is
to
pinned to
prove
the
that
top
he
of the
never
chat.
abused her one time, Amber wins. So let's take a look at some of the evidence. This was one of the first messages shown to Mr. Depp.
Him even saying Amber wins.
In his cross-examination. This is a message to Paul Bettany, his drug buddy, early on in their relationship, when he says, "Let's burn Amber. Let's drown her before we burn her. I will fuck her burnt corpse afterwards to make sure she is dead." Some of the most vile,
he's going
disgusting
and he's
language
reading
that you could ever imagine.
all of it.
That is what he said to her at the beginning of the relationship. So let's look at how the relationship was bookended. You remembered Mr. Depp the other day in response to some text that we'll see later saying, "I don't write like that." This is a bookend of the relationship. This is after it was over. I asked Mr. Depp to read that top text. You'll remember that was the only thing I asked him to read, and he immediately said, "I didn't write that text," even though, of course, he did.
Well, maybe he didn't.
Even though he wrote the text
like
under it that said, "Hopefully that cunt's rotting corpse is decomposing in the fucking trunk of a Honda Civic." That's how he bookended their relationship.
I don't know. Maybe I'm talking.
Ladies and gentlemen, these words are a
That's
window
what I heard.
into the heart
Hello
and
and welcome.
mind
If
of
you were
America's
just
favorite pirate.
join the chat. Hit the like
This is
button
the
down
real Johnny
below.
Depp.
Please, the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe. Join me on screen.
This is the real Johnny Depp after Miss Heard decided that she
in the pinned
couldn't
comment
take it anymore.
in the chat.
Decided that she needed to leave him.
We can talk
and I'm
about
not going to reread this whole text.
case. I would love to do that.
This
with
is
you
where
guys.
he says she's begging for global.
I will pause this, whatever's going on, and we will talk about the case, or you can come up here and just watch it with me. And you can be on Avatar, or you can be on screen with me like this. So it's completely up to you, but welcome. Join the chat. Let's keep going. Yes.
Humiliation. And she's going to get it. He says, I'll stop at nothing, and I can only hope that karma kicks in and takes the gift of breath from her. It's one of the only promises to Miss Heard that Mr. Depp has ever kept. That's how he ended the relationship. But you saw how he started it. Now, Miss Heard did testify on the stand that Mr. Depp abused her countless times. First, it started, they were very happy. They started dating in 2011, and things were good. And she testified that even during periods of abuse, even during their relationship, when there was abuse occurring, that there were periods where they were very happy. It's the cycle of violence. It's the cycle of sobriety. There were periods when everything was good, when the monster was gone, and then the monster would return. You heard about how the first incidents of violence took place in 2012, when Miss Heard asked Johnny about his tattoo that used to say Winona forever and had been changed to say Wino forever. And she laughed. And she said, and he slapped me across the face. She thought it was a joke, and then he did it 2 more times. And then he said, I thought I put the monster away and I'd done it before. That's what he said to her during that first incidence of violence. But you don't just have to take what Mr. Depp said in his text. We can hear through his own voice what he called Miss Heard.
Okay, Rottenborn. Yeah, here we go. Audio. Hello and welcome. If you're just join the chat, hit the like button, please. Hit the subscribe button, and you can join me on screen by clicking the link in the
you heard Mr. Depp get on the stand
in the chat
and say that was Miss
StreamYard,
Heard's
very
term.
easy. Join
She
me
made
on
it
screen.
up. That was what she used to refer to him when she was nagging him, because she didn't want him to have a good time. She didn't want him to have a beer once in a while. That's what he's implying. But no, this was a term created by Mr. Depp that she heard for the first time in 2012 after he slapped her 3 times across the face and said, I thought I put the monster away. And after he sat up here on the stand under oath and told you that she made that term up, we look back at his texts, the writing at the time. The first text is after Australia in 2015, during a period of sobriety, a short-lived period of recovery for Mr. Depp, when he told Jerry Judge, his bodyguard, all I had to do was send the monster away and lock him up. Remember, he texted Elton John, or sent an email to Elton John in 2012, referring to himself as the monster. He tells Dr. Kipper, the doctor to whom he's paid millions and millions and millions of dollars, thank you, my darling Kipper. He says, I've locked my monster child away in a cage deep within. He tells Stephen Duders, you know Mr. Duders, he liked to text Mr. Duders. He tells him, she thinks my Peruvian period, which is a reference to cocaine, he admitted to that means him using cocaine, has made me a monster and that I am ruining the relationship. Imagine that, someone actually thinking that maybe the impact of alcohol and cocaine is ruining a relationship. How dare she?
Here we
He
go
says,
again
need
with
to
the
discuss the news
monster, and here we
helicopters.
go
The
again
monster,
with the drugs
I want to shoot
and
a
alcohol.
motherfucker,
It's
but don't worry,
okay,
the
we get
monster is
it.
not involved.
Johnny
Mr.
himself
Depp
said,
knows
yes,
that he can turn into a monster.
done
He
drugs
knows
and
that.
alcohol. Get over it.
He knows that. He got up here on the stand and tried to deny that to you. Talk about lack of accountability. Let's see the monster. Let's see the monster in the flesh.
What happened? Nothing happened this morning, you know that?
Were you in here?
No.
So then nothing happened to you this morning.
Yeah, you're right. I just woke up and you were so sweet and nice. We're not even fighting this morning. All I did was say sorry.
Did something happen to you this morning? I don't think so.
No, that's the thing.
You want to see crazy? I'll give you a second.
Oh, they're playing this video. Okay, I can't.
Oh, you're crazy.
This video is so
You're
Have
stupid.
you drunk this
I'll
whole
give
thing
my
this
thoughts on
morning?
that later.
You got this going?
I just started it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Really? See that shit on me,
No,
motherfucker?
I didn't. You were smashing shit.
Oh, bye. Ass.
You see Miss Heard laughing in that? She's not laughing in that. Mr. Depp in this courtroom right now is laughing and making snide remarks as that video is being played. But it's not a laughing matter. Who does that? Who does that? Imagine being in Amber's shoes on February 10th, 2016, videotaping him because when he's sober and sweet, you've never loved anything more. But when he mixes the drugs and he mixes drinks, he turns into this man. You've seen it before. You're praying it won't happen again, but deep down, you know it will. You know that that man will come out. You know that monster will come out, and you want him to change.
Oh my God,
Imagine
the monster, the monster.
the person you love, behaving violently that way, like a wild animal. That is abuse. That's abuse. And you don't have to look at that incident in isolation to find that it's abuse. You can look at it in the context of their whole relationship. This isn't about breaking down a series of individual days that you've heard evidence about. This is about the cumulative effect of Mr. Depp and Miss Heard's relationship and whether that constitutes abuse. That is abuse, ladies and gentlemen. That's domestic abuse. And their response is, she sold
Okay.
it to TMZ, which she didn't. There's no evidence of, and she was on a plane. The only evidence suggests she was on an international flight when Mr. Tremaine testified that they received it and it was validated within something like 15 minutes, which could only have happened by the person who sent it. Miss Heard was in the air. She didn't send it to TMZ. She never leaked anything to TMZ, as you heard from her own mouth. Who would want that to become public? Again, in order to find for Mr. Depp, you would have to find that for his defamation claim, every single thing that ever happened between them that could constitute abuse,
Subscribe down
Amber
below.
was the abuser.
Hit the thumbs
Every
up
single
button.
time. You have to
And you
believe
can
the
join me on
unbelievable.
screen by
You all are
clicking the
smarter
link
than
in
that.
the pinned comment in the
But Mr.
chat.
Depp thought he could
StreamYard, it's
hide
very
it.
easy.
He thought he
Do
could
it.
hide the
Let's
monster.
talk.
That's why he lied in insurance forms that you have to fill out in order to be able to act. That's why he said he hadn't taken illegal substances, whether prescribed by a physician or not. That obviously wasn't true in the past 12 months.
Hello, if you've just joined
keep
me,
talking about Mr. Depp's
welcome. You can join me on
role as a
screen by
father.
clicking the
This is what
link
he
in the
what he
pinned
sent.
comment in the chat.
A
It's
text that he
StreamYard,
sent,
it's very
DX207.
easy.
Now
So easy
Lily
to do. You
Rose,
can
his
talk
daughter,
about Kate.
hates me because
We
she
are in
thinks
the
I'm
middle
drinking, and
of
she's right,
Amber
but I can't
Heard's
admit.
sides closing arguments
fucking
right
die
now.
in
So
her
yeah,
eyes.
that's what we're doing.
Thanks for that one, Vanessa.
Welcome. Click the like button down below. Click the subscribe button down below.
This is Mr. Depp passed out in a Tokyo hotel room during the press tour for The Lone Ranger in 2013. When Ms. Heard testified that Mr. Depp screamed at me, and all I could think were the kids are in an adjoining room. And Mr. Depp passed out with his head like this I don't think he was sleeping on the floor because he had a bad back. They keep referring to these pictures as she took pictures of Mr. Depp while he was asleep. He's not asleep in that picture. He's passed out, drunk and high, and she's taking pictures because she wants him to realize what he's done and get help and seek help.
Oh, right.
I don't think that
Okay.
looks like the spice cabinet of anyone in this courtroom. That's Mr.
Oh,
Depp.
my God.
This is Mr. Depp. This is Mr. Depp.
I hate these pictures. I really
This
do.
is Mr. Depp. And all you
Hate
hear from Mr.
them.
Depp when these pictures are shown is snickering.
I just
and
think
defiance.
it's so conniving and so manipulative and
Victim blaming Miss Heard
like
for taking this picture of him, for
pre-planned
trying to
take
help.
all these pictures. It's crazy.
So let's talk about some of these instances of abuse. Oh, forgot one. In March 2013, talked about the Wino Forever tattoo. In March 2013, there were a couple instances. There was one where on March 8th, and we'll get to that in a second, where he was drinking brown liquor and doing a lot of cocaine. Or that might have been that was March 22nd. On March 8th, this is when Mr. Depp backhanded her. She felt like her lip went into her teeth and got a little blood on the wall. He grabbed her by the arm and held her on the floor, screaming at her. We'll come back to this in a minute. This is March 22nd. This is what Mr. Depp said isn't every hour happy hour. Again, totally abandoning any responsibility for behavior like this. But what happened on March 22nd is he wanted Miss Heard to remove a painting by her ex-partner, and he wanted to admit to an affair that she wasn't having. She didn't admit to it because it wasn't true. So he decided to have some lines of cocaine and some whiskey for breakfast. And then, on the way to filming the Keith Richards documentary, after a multi-hour argument, he grabbed their dog, their teacup Yorkie, and holds the dog, Boo, out of the window of a moving car. And he's howling like an animal, Miss Heard said, while holding the dog out of the car. That is abuse, ladies and gentlemen. That's abuse. Let's go back to this, because Ms. Vasquez read a parade of witnesses that she believes support Johnny's defense in this case.
Yeah,
But
so
as you've
Rottenborn
seen
is trying
over
to
the course of this proceeding,
redefine abuse
these
basically
witnesses,
for the jury.
as I previewed in the opening, almost all of them are witnesses on his payroll. They're all scared to say anything bad about him, and they've seen what happens to people who do. And none were there for the instances of domestic violence. What they're saying is, oh, if he didn't abuse Miss Heard in front of his 4 bodyguards, then it must have never happened. That's essentially what they're asking you to believe. That's ridiculous. That's not the way domestic violence works. Take his sister, Christy. I know it seems like a year ago, but she was the first witness in this case. You'll remember her on the stand when I presented her with these texts that say, stop drinking, stop coke, and stop pills. You'll remember her squirming and saying, oh, I don't think I was asking him to stop drinking, stop coke, stop pills. She couldn't even answer that basic question because she wanted to lie for Mr. Depp and say that Miss Heard was delusional. She couldn't even admit this to you. She's nothing but an enabler. The same with Sean Bett, his head of security, who's been sitting in this courtroom for the past 6 weeks. He's right there. Mr. Bett was the one who testified to you that when Mr. Depp has a few drinks of alcohol, he said, I wrote this down, he said it's like the rest of us drinking sparkling water. I don't think that kitchen video that we just saw was like you or I when we drink sparkling water. This is the same Sean Bett who said that on the evening of May 21st, 2016, which Elaine will talk about in a little bit, he said Mr. Depp may have bumped something off a table. You've seen the pictures. You'll see him again. Just like Travis McGivern said that Mr. Depp rearranged Miss Heard's closet. You've seen the pictures. You'll see him again. Just like Tara Roberts in the Bahamas, who tried to blame everything on Miss Heard and only under cross-examination admitted that Mr. Depp passed out face down in the sand underneath a hammock and his son Jack found him there. She took a video of their cabin in the Bahamas to try to suggest to you that this assault that Miss Heard alleges couldn't have taken place. But conveniently, she didn't take the camera into the closet where Mr. Depp held Miss Heard.
Conveniently, your
Get
client
to that incident.
really
She didn't
didn't
take the
present
video
a
camera into
lot
the
of
bathroom
the
where he
evidence
sexually
that she
assaulted
should
Miss
have.
Heard. She didn't do
For
that
someone that took as many pictures
because she wanted to generate evidence
and
only favorable to Mr. Depp. Think about
kept as
Sean
many
Bett and
receipts as
Starlin
she
Jenkins
did, you
conflicting
would think she
stories
would
about
have
the birthday
more,
party on
in
April
my
21st.
opinion.
Remember, Mr. Depp experienced horrific financial news the evening of that night, April 21st, 2016. He learned that he was essentially out of money and he needed to start selling things. Well, we all know what Mr. Depp does when he receives bad news like that. He left the meeting at 9:30 and didn't arrive at Miss Heard's birthday party until 11:15. Okay, fine, he was late. But we all know what he does when he has that hour and 45 minutes of free time and he's stressed out about something. Mr. Bett testified, remember he said, I took him to his home on Sweetser Avenue, his other home, to pick up a birthday present for Miss Heard. That's what he said. That's what he said. Mr. Jenkins, you may remember him, he testified by the video link on the stand, and I said, you don't know what he did in that intervening time period. And he said, oh, yes, I do. I do. He said, Mr. Depp was visiting his sick mother. And I said, who told you that? And he said, Mr. Bett. The witnesses that Mr. Depp has paraded up here,
a
we're here in
lot
person. We're
of
here in
text,
person
a
because
lot of
they're on his
audio,
payroll.
a lot of pictures
Almost all of them.
in this case.
And they're telling you whatever they think they need to tell you to get you to take Mr. Depp's side, just as we previewed they would do in the opening. But Mr. Depp would go through periods where he would apologize, where he would be grateful. I have no doubt that there were times when Mr. Depp wanted to get better. These are texts, PX 120A and 120B. I won't read them all to you. These are texts that Mr. Depp sent to Paige Heard, Amber's mom, after detox on the island in 2014. He says, there were more than a few times when I thought it would be more simple to take that route. Meaning go for a swim and swallow a big drink of ocean. And he said it was Amber and Amber alone that got me through this. There is no luckier man on this earth to have the strength that Amber gives me and the full support of each of you. So as you're weighing the evidence and you're weighing Mr. Depp's credibility, think to yourself, what do I believe? What he has a motive to say on the stand or what he wrote contemporaneously with the events? Take his own words to Amber after the detox. Just to let you know that I'm fine, my angel. I miss you, of course, but this was the right thing to do to speed up the process. I love you more than life. But then there were these days. Then there were times like this. This is sent on March 9th. We had a slightly grim morning, is the way Mr. Depp describes it. You'll remember the text from a few days later, referred to as the disco bloodbath text, where Miss Heard says, is that about last Friday night by any chance? And Mr. Depp responds, how can you make me smile about such a hideous moment? He testified on the stand, I don't remember what happened that Friday night, but Miss Heard sure did. And this is one of the things that she had to show for it. Now, Ms. Vasquez showed this to you in opening statements and made it seem like, again, remember what I said at the beginning, if you take pictures, they're fake. If you didn't take pictures, it didn't happen. Here's one where she did take a picture, but Ms. Vasquez says, but she doesn't have injuries on her face. Look at the date that this picture was taken, ladies and gentlemen. March 23rd, 2013, 15 days after this incident. So even when there are pictures, they're trying to deceive you into thinking, oh, there should have been more. This is a 2-week-old bruise. And she texted, look who she texted that to. She texted to her mom. They say,
why wasn't there more though? Why isn't there more? Like
March 23rd,
she took so many
2013.
pictures and stuff. You would think there would be more.
Let's go to Hicksville. You remember Hicksville? Obviously, there's been a little bit of discussion about that in this case. This is where Mr. Depp got jealous that a woman named Kelly Sue was sitting close to Miss Heard and maybe had her arm around her at a campfire. And everyone was having a good time. There were some mushrooms involved. There was some drinking. And Mr. Depp got jealous of that. Now, he claims that Miss Heard is the abuser, that she's so much stronger than he is. But then he testified that the evidence shows that in Hicksville, he was the one who said he was just trying to protect Amber. Well, who says, why would she
Well,
need
yeah,
protection if
that's
she's the abuser?
true.
And he went and he took Kelly Sue's hand, forcibly removed it from
was
Miss
helping
Heard,
Amber.
embarrassing Miss Heard, ruining the mood of the whole
God, he's
night.
gonna go
So they
through
went
the
and
check.
got into an argument in the trailer in which not only did he trash the trailer, but he took her into the bathroom. He slammed her up against the side wall of the bedroom by her neck, holds her there. And no, sorry, that was the next one. In Hicksville, he took her into the bathroom of the trailer and did what he called a cavity search, where he inserted his fingers inside of her and sexually assaulted her, then trashed the trailer. And you heard this Morgan Knight person who testified a few days ago, who said it was $62 of damage. You also heard evidence that the way he got involved in this trial was by reaching out to
Welcome.
one of
If
the
you were
main Johnny
just
Depp
joining,
fan
join the chat. You can also
influencers
join
on
me
social
on
media.
screen by
And
clicking
you saw
the
that text. That's how he
pinned
injected himself into this
comment
trial.
at the top of the chat.
There's way more than
Yes.
$62 of damage. You heard testimony from
Another
Rocky
cheesy
Pennington,
rotten
Whitney
board.
Heard,
Yes.
Whitney Enriquez,
If you want
and
to join me
Amber
on
about
screen
him
to
trashing
discuss
the
the
trailer.
case,
And is
click
that
the
really a
link in the
surprise? The man's
pinned
admitted that he
comment.
smashes
It's
things when he
StreamYard.
gets
It's
angry. The
very
man's
easy.
admitted that he smashed hotel rooms.
Hello,
You saw the
hello,
quote that he
and
admitted
welcome.
to the other day, that when he
We're
wants to hit
watching
something,
the
he's going to hit it, and he
closing
doesn't
arguments
care
right
about the
now
repercussions.
from Amber's side.
So in Hicksville, Hicksville was late May 2013. This is another text to drug buddy Bettany, where he says, I, of course, pounded and displayed ugly colors to Amber on recent journey. I am an insane person and not so
I have to
fair-headed
put this
after
on the
too much of
screen
the drink.
just because.
Weed,
Rotten
pills,
born.
fine. Booze, my capacity is too large and I won't stop. Ugly and sad. Oh, how I love it.
There appears to be an Amber Alert, but I think we're okay. People are getting it, I guess, on their phones that haven't silenced that.
Oh, okay, Your Honor.
Okay.
Can I keep going?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So that's after Hicksville. This is what I was getting to next. Remember,
there was like an Amber Alert.
the testimony about
He was
Mr.
getting
Depp
their
being drunk
phone
on
or
his yacht
something. Oh, it's still happening.
on the island in the Bahamas in
You can
2013
hear it.
when
It's still
Mr. Depp
happening.
looked a little scary by the way his body fell into the water, and Lily Rose, his daughter, started to cry. Miss Heard comforted Lily Rose, and then Depp accused Amber of making them aware of this, that he was drinking again, making his kids aware of this. And he slammed her up against the side wall of the bedroom, held her up by her neck, held her there for a second, and said, I can fucking kill you, and you're an embarrassment. That's what he said. And then, do you remember what happened? Lily Rose and Amber helicoptered away from the island. And while Amber was in the helicopter with Lily Rose, Mr. Depp sends her this piece of poetry, calling her a lesbian camp counselor because she cared about his drinking, and just ridiculing her
Okay, and
for trying to protect his daughter. Sickening. This text, let's fast forward a little bit to, actually, before we talk about this is the Boston flight. Let's talk about the Moscow flight. The Moscow flight, when Mr. Depp and Amber, she said that was the one time she took ecstasy or MDMA with Mr. Depp, and she learned her lesson. When he hit her on the plane, when he threatened to break the flight attendant's wrist, and Miss Vasquez, again, just tried to tell you, oh, he always wore rings. Now, Miss Heard said almost all the time he did, or maybe sometimes when he didn't. And in the picture that she just showed you, PX 1248, you can take a look at that when you review the evidence. That's a picture taken in Moscow with no rings other than a wedding ring on his finger, or some kind of ring. He's wearing one ring on his finger. And so in Mr. Depp's world, they're going to try to come at you either way. They say, well, he was wearing rings, but it didn't leave a mark on your face.
well, yeah,
and then they show
Amber
you a
said he
picture
was
where
wearing
he wasn't
rings
wearing
too
rings
when she
during that
testified.
trip. So that's what happened in
Like
Moscow.
what?
On 2013
You
in
can't
London, Mr. Depp.
you can't rearrange history. You can't erase history. Amber testified he always wore rings. Oh, what happened here? Okay. Something happened? Oh, I think it's just silence. Hold on. I'll try to skip through it a little bit. No, still silence. Oh. Oh. Oh, wow. The audio is messed up.
He blamed them only on
Here
opiates,
we
but we
go.
know they happen throughout, where he doesn't remember what's happened. Is you're weighing the evidence?
Make sure
Is
you
you're
smash
assessing
that
whether Mr.
like
Depp has
button,
borne his
subscribe to
burden
the
of proof?
channel,
Think to
join the
yourself, do you
chat,
believe
join me on
Amber's account of
screen
what
by
happened on the
clicking the
plane, or
link
do you
in the
believe
pinned comment
that
up
person's
top.
account that you just heard? But actually, you can look at his account from a few days later, May 30th, in which he told, again, Paul Bettany, he said, drank all night before I picked Amber up to fly to LA. No food for days, powders, half a bottle of whiskey, 1,000 Red Bulls and vodkas, pills, 2 bottles of champagne. And what do you get? An angry aggro engine in a fucking blackout, screaming obscenities and insulting any fuck who got near. I'm done. I'm admittedly too fucked in the head to spray my rage at the
Look,
one
no
I
one is
love.
saying that Johnny is
For little
completely
reason as well,
innocent
I'm too old to be
in
that
this
guy, but
relationship
pills
here.
are
Like,
fine.
this
And he
relationship is
expects
very
you to
toxic
believe that he's
both
carried his burden of
ways,
proof
but
in showing
I
that
don't
no abuse
believe that
happened
he
on that plane.
physically assaulted her in
You don't
any
have to look
way.
at just that. You can look at this text to Patty Smith when he says, when I was in NYC, they were brief visits and I fucked and charged by horrific fights with Amber. I fucked up and drank and got shitty, was so disappointed in myself. You can look at his text to Miss Heard the next day where he says, once again, I find myself in a place of shame and regret. Of course, I am sorry. I really don't know why or what happened. Well, no wonder. You heard the voice on the plane. Of course he doesn't know what happened. But I will never do it again. My illness somehow crept up and grabbed me. I must get better. I love you and feel so bad for letting you down. And what his response has been throughout this trial to things like that is blaming Amber, saying he's just placating her. Is that carrying his burden of proof and showing that abuse hasn't happened even a single time? This is in the lead up to Australia. But before we get there, we can talk about January 25th in Tokyo at the premiere of Mordecai, where he did slam her up against the hallway wall.
Oh, we're going to talk
Wail
about the
on her. And he
premiere
did
of
get on her
Mordecai
back in the
now.
closet.
Hello
what
and
did they
welcome.
say?
If you just
Look at her
joined,
backless
smash
dress.
that
She
like
doesn't have
button,
any
hit the
bruises. She
subscribe
testified herself
button,
that she was checking out
join
pictures
the
because she was
chat, and you can
concerned that there
also join
were.
me on
So now their
screen by
theory is if
clicking the
there's no
link
marks, it didn't
pinned to
happen.
the top of the
We
chat
all
in
know that's not the
StreamYard. It's
case.
very easy. We can discuss the case. I would love to do that.
February 2015,
Welcome.
this is when they got married. The day they got married, you heard the testimony from Io Tillett, right? That where Mr. Depp told him, I can now punch her anytime I want and no one can do anything about it. He'll say it's a joke he made on his wedding day. Then we fast forward to Australia, where Miss Heard is flying from London, where she's filming The Danish Girl, to see her new husband for the first time since their wedding. And these are excerpts from DX353. All but the bottom right one are in the days leading up to this, where he's on a drug-fueled bender. He's hanging out with Marilyn Manson. He's getting drugs from his assistants who are enablers.
Oh,
Again,
he's hanging out
there's
with
a reason you
Marilyn
didn't hear them
Manson.
testify at this
Okay.
trial. They're getting him drugs for days and days. And then the one on the bottom right, you'll remember you've seen a couple times. This is after he chopped his finger off, when he says, need more cocaine and ecstasy. So, and no one, Miss Heard was in touch with his assistants, but no one told her the hornet's nest that she was walking into. And we all know what happened in Australia. We all know that Mr. Depp, she gets there, he pulls out a bag of MDMA, and he took a handful. She didn't say he took 10 at a time. She did say he took 8 to 10 over the course of that period. The second day, Mr. Depp, who claims that Miss Heard refused to do a post-nup, calls Amber's domestic relations attorney, Michelle Mulrooney, you heard from her, when he was drunk, and he fired her. And he told Amber for about the 25th time, she said, the only way out of this is death. I don't want a post-nup. And then she said she remembered him slamming up against the wall. And I won't go through, you remember her testimony from Australia. You remember her saying that he had her by the neck, squeezing her
Yeah,
neck.
we do remember her
saying that he
testimony.
threw her
Like,
on the games table like a ping pong table.
What?
You remember seeing the pictures of that broken table. You remember her saying that At some point, he had a broken bottle up against her face, and he told her that he'd carve up her face, that he was throwing bottles at her. He's throwing bottles one after another, and I could feel glass breaking behind me, and you've seen the evidence of that. And he was just
Hello and
over
welcome.
again,
If you were
smashing
just
the phone into
joining,
the
hit
wall,
that like
screaming
button
at me
down
as she watched
below,
it break into pieces.
thumbs up,
Now,
hit
she
the
doesn't know how
subscribe
he
button,
lost his
and you
finger.
can join me on screen by clicking the
She said
link
that
in
she
the
saw him
pinned
smash a phone to
comment
pieces.
at the
And
top
you
of the
heard him
chat.
get
It's
impeached the other day with
StreamYard.
his
It's
testimony
very
from the
easy.
UK,
We
which
can
was
talk
different from what he
about this
testified here, where he said
case.
he did smash a phone. And then they tried to put that picture in front of you with a desk phone and suggest that that was it. It's deception. They're trying to deceive you. And then you heard Ms. Heard testify that the next morning she found meat that he had left all over the house, but not before what happened before she went to bed that night, where Ms. Heard testified, and I remember trying to get up and I was slipping on the glass. I was wanting to move. I felt this pressure in my pubic bone. I remember just not wanting to move because I didn't know if it was broken. I didn't know if the bottle that he had inside me was broken.
Wow. Hello and welcome to anybody that's new, that's
This is the next
watching.
morning.
Hit the like
This is what he
button
wrote
down
with the
below.
bloody
Hit the
stump of his finger.
subscribe
And
button
there's
down
been
below. And you can
testimony
also
about
join me on
what
screen
happened
by
to cut the
clicking the
finger
link
off. But
in
frankly,
the
it's
pinned comment at
irrelevant
the
to
top
your
of the chat. I'm
deliberations
sorry
here.
I keep
Amber
saying
could have
that,
chopped
but
it off with an axe, and
I
it
don't
has
know. People
nothing
keep
to
joining,
do
so who
with
knows?
whether or not Mr. Depp abused her.
Welcome. We
But
are
we all know she didn't.
rewatching
We all know that his
the
fingers
closing
weren't curled,
arguments, and we
and
are
someone was standing
watching
with a half-gallon
Amber
vodka
side
bottle from
right
about
now.
where that canopy is and threw it, and it somehow managed to damage just the bottom of the finger and leave the nail fully intact. We all know that didn't happen. Mr. Depp knows it didn't happen, and we'll see some evidence of that. But here, he writes about her ambition, starring Billy Bob and Easy Amber, who talked about controlling, jealousy, talked about him not wanting her to act. Dawn Hughes testified how that is a form of intimate partner abuse. Here he's writing on the mirror
Let's
again.
not bring
and
up
they try to
Dawn
blame her and
Hughes.
say that she
Dr.
called Carly
Hughes.
Simon.
Okay.
She didn't write that. Who was the lunatic in the house? Who was writing everywhere? There's no evidence she wrote that. She testified she doesn't even know who Carly Simon was until she was told. This is some of the evidence. Mr. Depp told you a couple different stories the other day about the evidence on the right. He claimed that was the handle of vodka between those two beer cans there. But then under cross-examination, he admitted it's not, that there's not enough glass on the floor, that there's no handle of vodka on the floor. But what there is in the picture on the right is evidence of when he was throwing bottles past Amber's head and breaking that plate glass window. More writing, more abuse on the right. Imagining having a painting area where you're drawing two canvases and you and your husband get in a fight, and while you are asleep that night, he takes the bloody stump of his finger and dips it in paint and destroys your paintings. Ladies and gentlemen, that's abuse. Good luck and be careful at the top. And this is a good chance to talk about Mr. Depp's controlling and jealous rage and his desire to control Amber's career. He didn't want her to act. As early as 2013, he tells his sister, I don't need actress bullshit and her fucking ambition. He tells her in this recording,
If you look at the bigger picture,
I
what is
became
it?
irrational when you're doing movies. I become jealous and fucking crazy and weird. And, you know, you fight a lot more.
I become jealous when you're doing movies. I become irrational and fucking crazy and weird. Out of his own mouth. This is some of the notes of Dr. Blaustein, his therapist, called him self-destructive. Something about wait up to fight the devil. Jealous.
Hello to anybody new that's watching. Welcome.
Jealous.
Click
Is he paranoia?
the subscribe button
Fear,
down below.
envy.
Make sure you smash
He
that
wanted to
like button,
control
that
her.
thumbs
He
up. It
wanted to
really
own
helps.
her. He
And you
didn't
can
want her
join
to
me
have
on
any
screen
career.
by clicking the link.
And then he
in the
says
pinned
things like, I have
comment
other
in the
uses
chat.
for your throat, which
Join
do
the
not
chat as
include
well.
injury. No one hasn't previously grabbed someone by the throat would write, which do not include injury. But we all know how Mr. Depp thinks along these lines, because you saw these two texts the other day that he sat on the stand and denied writing. And I'm not going to read them to you again, because they are the most vulgar, vile writing you can imagine. He said, that's not my style. I wouldn't write like that. Of course he would, and he did. These are texts that he produced, that he gave to Amber and our team in this litigation from him to his personal assistant, Stephen Duders. This is the way he thinks about women. This, not what you heard on the stand, that. It's disgusting. He admitted that he cut his finger off. This is evidence of him admitting to it to people other than Amber. I cut the top of my middle finger off. Says that to Dr. Kipper. Says it again to Dr. Kipper. The bottom one he says to Nurse Velati, I just chopped my finger off. But he does say it to Amber too. Remember, we played this one 4 times, and Mr. Depp denied that he was actually saying the day that I chopped my finger off. Let's hear it one more time.
I don't know.
I'm talking about Australia, the day that
Now
I
we're
chopped
talking
my
about
finger off.
Australia. Okay.
The day that I chopped my finger off. So let's fast forward to March 23rd, 2015. After just a few weeks in Australia, Mr. Depp has a finger injury, no doubt about that. He comes home. He gets what they call a soft cast on it, which you heard his treating physician and our experts say it doesn't have sides on it, but it's a hard plaster cast over the top of his finger that can be wielded like a club. And they got in an argument when Miss Heard discovered that he was having an affair with a woman named Rochelle that had been going on before the wedding, after the wedding, and she confronted him about that. No surprise there. They got in a huge argument. At some point in the argument, he bolted up the stairs. Now, Travis McGivern claims that she threw a Red Bull can at him. She and Whitney Henriquez say that absolutely didn't happen. But even if you believe Mr. McGivern, at some point, Mr. Depp went up the stairs. He went to the fight. This is the man that claims he always wants to run, and this time he had his bodyguard with him. So he could have just walked out the door, but he runs up the stairs, and Miss Henriquez is standing on the precipice of the stairs. And Amber admitted that when she thought he was about to push her down the stairs, as he's grabbing at her and Amber with his free hand and trying to club them with the casted hand, that she said, I punched him square in the face. I punched him square in the face. And they showed you a picture of the shiner that she had, that Mr. Depp had. Miss Heard doesn't deny that. They're trying to say she's the abuser for defending herself and her sister from this animal who's running at them.
She
This
is
person
the
that they
abuser
claim
here.
couldn't possibly have done
Allegedly.
this because he had
She is.
a hurt finger. Yet he could have done this. This is what Mr. McGivern said was rearranging her closet. I don't know what you all do when you rearrange your closets, but I hope it doesn't look like this. This is throwing a clothing rack down the stairs. This is knocking this over. This is what he did to rearrange her closet with his hurt finger that he couldn't possibly have hit Miss Heard with, they claim. That in and of itself, that destruction of property, even if he hadn't hit her that night, that's abuse. Imagine being married to someone and walking on eggshells so thick that you don't know if you set them off, if that's what's going to happen. That's abuse. And it's disgusting. But sometimes he would apologize. He'd say, I can't express how sorry I am for having stooped so low as to have spewed such vicious untruths for the sole purpose of hurting you. Grievous error, shameful. So he went in these cycles. She thought he could change for good. And when it was good, it was really good. But then sometimes things like December 15th came around, where she remembers him chasing her in the kitchen. She remembers him shoving her 2 or 3 times and sending her toppling over a Chase lounge and saying, do you really want to go again, tough guy? And she looked at him and he balled up his fist, leaned back and headbutted her square in the nose and pounded her head with the back of his fist so she couldn't breathe on that bed that we're going to see in a second, where she was suffocating in this pillow top. And she said, this is when I thought I was going to die. He's going to kill me and he doesn't even know what he's doing because he's out of his mind. And these are the pictures that they claim. I don't know what they're claiming. I don't know if they're claiming she painted on the bruise. Oh, you weren't hurt badly enough, so therefore you're making it up. Look under her eye. And again, their theory is that all of this is a lie. All of this was some grand hoax. If this were a hoax, ladies and gentlemen, she'd have worse injuries than that. She'd really do it up. She took pictures as they existed when she could at the time of abuse. And yet Ms. Vasquez has the nerve to say, well, why didn't she videotape an incident of abuse. What, as she's being hit, she's supposed to somehow grab a video camera with one hand while she's defending herself with another hand? You heard her in one of the audio tapes talking about when she hit him as he was trying to barge at her and she got her feet caught under a door as he's coming after her. And of course, as Don Hughes testified to, victims of coercive control like this, they do try to appease their abusive partner and apologize for things that aren't their fault. So as you're coming at me, Johnny, and you push a door into me and I have to hit you to get away, to protect myself, yeah, she did apologize for that because that's the cycle of violence. That's what victims do. Yet they continue to blame the victim. There's no evidence she painted on that bloody lip. And again, if we're talking about a hoax, the next day she went on James Corden and they say, well, you can't see any injury there, so it must not have been. She would have to be
there was no
the dumbest person
injury.
in the world to say, I'm going to commit an abuse hoax, but let's do it the day before.
Where
I
is
go
the
on
injury
national
in this
television.
picture? I don't
Let's do it the day before.
see
You
it.
heard Melanie Iglesias, her makeup artist, testify in great detail. And I didn't even understand half the terms about makeup that she was using, but she testified in great detail about exactly what she did to cover up those bruises. The red lipstick that she put to cover up the busted lip. You heard the testimony of that from a neutral party who said exactly what she did. She talked about how she looked at the color wheel to neutralize the bruising. They claim it was just an accidental headbutt. Well, no accidental headbutt rips out hair. They claim, oh, Miss Heard somehow used a pocket knife to cut this portion of the bed out to stage this. Well, I don't know if that's a pocket knife or not, but the only testimony in this trial about a pocket knife is Whitney Henriquez saying that Mr. Depp carried a pocket knife in his pocket every day. We all know where that, if it is a pocket knife, where that came from. I think one of the most telling things about this incident is the text he sent to David Heard, Amber's dad, 2 weeks later, where he says, I meant to send this to you a week or so ago. I'm sending it to you now. And he says, I forget if it's a text or an email, but you can look at DX580. He says, yes, I fucked up and went too far in our fight. Because as a result of that fight and the bruises that all of her family saw, the family refused to go to the Bahamas with them for Christmas. The family refused to go to the Bahamas for Christmas, and on that trip to the island, Mr. Depp kept passing out, and every time he passed out, he would dump a glass of wine on Amber's lap, and she didn't like that, and she yelled at him. And because it was in front of his kids, he got up. This is the one where Tara Roberts took the video, but she didn't show you the closet, she didn't show you the bathroom, and Amber says, while holding my neck, this is in the closet, he said, I'll fucking kill you if you ever speak to me like that in front of my kids again because you embarrass me. And then he took her into the bathroom and she said, but this time he grabbed my vagina, shoved his fingers inside me, but through my bathing suit and held me there and asked me if I was so fucking tough. And then she ran out of the house. And to keep him away from her, that's when he claims, and she admits she threw something at him. She didn't know what it was. It's been testimony it was a can of mineral spirits that she claimed that hit Mr. Depp. And Mr. Depp is somehow the victim in that encounter? Come on. We talk about the train ride to Asia. You saw the pictures taken before they got on the train ride where Mr. Depp has the same shadowing under his eye that he does in the allegedly abusive picture. But in that picture, he held in that train ride, talk about a honeymoon, he held her up against the wall while she was trying to get his arms off her neck, and he was squeezing her neck against the railway car. And at some point, I pulled the lapel of his shirt, he rips the shirt off, and she woke up with the shirt around her neck and a giant knot in the back of her head. Let's fast forward to her birthday party just very quickly. He experienced terrible financial news that night. He came over, they got into a fight. There's been conflicting evidence about that. But Amber said, I hit the side of the desk. He chest bumped me. He fell to the floor. I fell to the floor. And when I got back up, he held me down by the shoulders. And that's when he grabbed her by the pubic bone and pushed her down. And you'll remember Ms. Vasquez showing her interrogatory answers where she details a lot of this and saying, nowhere in there does it say that. And Ms. Heard says it actually does on page 64 and pointed out to Ms. Vasquez exactly where it says that. That's abuse. It's sexual abuse. But we all know what Mr. Depp does when he experiences terrible financial news or terrible news. He experienced terrible news that night, on the way to the birthday party where both of his bodyguards have testified that he was either visiting his sick mom or getting a birthday present for Amber. And then we know what happens the day after his mother passed away on May 21st, 2016. And we're going to skip through a little bit of this now, and Elaine will talk about this in the context of the counterclaim, but these are the pictures afterwards. These are pictures that now they're claiming that, they must have been faked. There's been no testimony in this case that these pictures were faked. There's been no testimony that the marks you see on Amber's face, including this mark with a straight line from below her eye to the top of her temple that it lines up directly with a phone. There's been no testimony that those are faked. Mr. Depp went through the house. He destroyed pictures of her friends. That's abuse. Property destruction like that, in and of itself, is abuse. He destroyed her office. He destroyed her friend Rocky Pennington's preparation for the bead show that she was having. He spilled wine in the hallway that you'll notice the police denied. Oh, there was no spilled wine in the hallway. Well, even Isaac Baruch testified that he saw this in the hallway. And they said she never sent anything to her medical providers. These are the texts that she sent to her nurse, Erin Filati, the night that it happened. These are pictures of her in the courtroom. We're not going to play this right now, but you can listen to this. This is that terribly disturbing text of him in July of 2016 threatening to cut himself and telling, "You cut me or I will." You all remember playing that. It was awful. It was awful. I'm not going to play it again, but it was horrible. That in and of itself is abusive. This is the document that Mr. Depp signed, the divorce agreement, where he says, sign in agreement with his signature, neither party has made false accusations for financial gain. He said that then. He could have fought this then, but he didn't because he knew that her allegations were true. But then he continued his campaign of humiliation. He says, "I want her replaced on that WB film." Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are absolutely overwhelming of abuse. One time, that's all you have to remember. Mr. Depp simply cannot prove to you that he never once abused Amber. And if you don't know, you have to return a verdict for Ms. Heard. A ruling against Amber here sends a message that no matter what you do as an abuse victim, you always have to do more. No matter what you document, you always have to document more. No matter whom you tell, you always have to tell more people. No matter how honest you are about your own imperfections and your own shortcomings in a relationship, you need to be perfect in order for people to believe you. Don't send that message. That's what he wants you to send. So I'm going to quickly get to another point that you have to find in order to prove or in order to rule for Mr. Depp. You would have to find that Ms. Heard made the statements with actual malice. Now, what Mr. Chu didn't tell you is that you have to find this by clear and convincing evidence. So this is much higher than the greater weight of the evidence standard that applies to the other claims, the other elements of the claim. Clear and convincing evidence is evidence that creates in your minds a firm belief or conviction that Mr. Depp has proved this issue. So if you believe that Ms. Heard did not act maliciously in writing her op-ed, then you must return a verdict for Ms. Heard, even if you think that he never abused her. But I'll quickly go over the evidence of this. The op-ed, you look at the words, it clearly wasn't a hit piece. She visited her attorney, Eric George, who testified by video that his objective was to make sure that there could be no meritorious claim that could be brought about this article relating to defamation. He gave Ms. Heard advice. She affirmatively followed all of it. So you cannot find that Ms. Heard met the clear and convincing evidence standard, given the testimony of Eric George, given the testimony of Terrence Doherty from the ACLU, when Amber went out of her way to ask her lawyer if it was okay. They will say it doesn't matter if she's lying, but even if that isn't, they will say that that doesn't matter if she's lying, but even that isn't true. Because again, keep in mind that if Ms. Heard wanted to be malicious toward Mr. Depp, the article would be very different. And I think it's interesting here, we'll talk about Mr. Waldman in a second, but that Amber utilized her attorney, Eric George, to make sure that she was following the law. Mr. Depp used his attorney, Adam Waldman, as an attack dog to defame Amber and to fulfill Depp's promise to her of global humiliation. The last thing I'll touch on before Elaine talks is Mr. Depp's damages. The man's at least consistent in one respect. He blames other people for his problems. Everyone but himself. You heard
Oh, Elaine's
Us
gonna
reading a
talk.
stack of articles dating
Her
years before
favorite
he
Elaine.
broke up with Amber, before their marriage broke apart, talking about his problems, talking about the fact that his movies were flops, talking about the fact that he was late to the set, he's unreliable as an actor. A word of reminder here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the only thing Amber ever did that Mr. Depp is allowed to sue her for is the op-ed. He's trying to say, I want to sue her for what she said in 2016. I want to sue her for harm that was caused then. You cannot do that. The only thing you're being asked to decide are the words of the op-ed defamatory, nothing else. Any damage to Mr. Depp's career is self-caused.
That's
Then
not
think about
true.
the
They
testimony
can
that
do
you heard
that.
His former business manager,
Right?
Joel Mandel, said that Depp
Tell
had
me
issues
in the
with drugs
chat.
and alcohol that damaged his career. Depp sued him. His former agent, Tracy Jacobs, said he was late to the set and that he used an earpiece. Depp fired her. She said Disney never committed to Pirate 6. Disney's corporate representative, Tina Newman, said that there was no record in Disney's records of this op-ed. This op-ed had nothing to do with it. In fact, Catherine Arnold, our damages expert, testified that the paper version of the article that allegedly they say came out 4 days after the op-ed was published the same day as the op-ed. It said that Johnny might not be in Pirate 6. The same day, the paper article came out the same day. So the op-ed didn't cause that. There's no evidence of any contract by Disney for Pirate 6. His agent, Jack Wiggum,
Yeah,
couldn't
no,
identify
there
a
is
contract.
evidence.
His former agent, Christian Carino, said that there's no contract. He didn't lose anything as a result of this op-ed. Anything he's lost is the result of his own choices. You also heard him lie to you. You heard him tell you that this was his first chance to tell his story. But let's break it down, because that's not true. He could have fought the TRO that Amber filed. He could have said, I didn't abuse her, but he chose not to do that. He could have fought her in the divorce case, but he chose not to do that. Instead, he signed the statement saying that no one had falsified any statements. He only filed this suit after he met Adam Waldman, the same Adam Waldman who convinced him to file suit against his former business manager, to file suit against his law firm and fire them and blame them for things. But by the time that Amber wrote the op-ed, Mr. Depp already had another opportunity to tell his story. He filed a case in the UK against the Sun for calling him a wife beater. And in that case, he had many of the same witnesses. He was on the stand for parts of 5 days, and he got to tell the fact finder in the UK whatever he wanted. Now, it's not the same testimony he told here, because you heard me impeach him about 13 times with his testimony from the UK. But he's had his chances. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to tell Mr. Depp that this was his last chance. Tell him to move on with his life.
No.
Tell him to let Amber move on with hers.
I
Stand
do
up
agree
for the
they both
freedom
need
of
to move
speech.
on, but there needs to be
Stand up
justice
for the
here.
First Amendment. This trial is about so much more than Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. It's about the freedom of speech. Stand up for it, protect it, and reject Mr. Depp's claims against Amber. And now you'll hear from Ms. Beretta Haupt about the counterclaim. Thank you.
Now it's time for Elaine. Elaine Bretterhoff. Bretterhoff? Bretterhoff. Something like that.
I got it. Yep. I'm good. Oop. I get to say good afternoon. And I know you've been listening to everybody for a long time here, and I echo Ben's very strong thank you to all of you for this extreme service and extraordinary service. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go really fast and try to go as quick as I can so that you can get a break from us and go make your decision. I know you're probably itching to do it at this point, but this is very important to us, and we appreciate your listening and we appreciate your being here. I'm going to stay on this slide for a moment, and there's something that's very important on this slide that hasn't been brought to your attention by Mr. Depp's team. When you see the actual damages, go down to the last paragraph, if you will. It says, Mr. Depp cannot recover damages for any harm that occurred after November 2, 2020. Do you all see that? So what Mr. Depp's team got up here and told you through Mr. Chu this morning has nothing to do with this case. He had his chance in the UK. The lawsuit was filed June 2018, 6 months before the op-ed. The trial was July 2020. The process ended, according to Mr. Marks, their expert, on November 2, 2020. And his damages stopped then. He can't get reputational damages. He can't get his legacy back for his children. He can't get anything after that day from you.
Yeah.
You can't restore his reputation. You can't give him anything. They didn't tell you that, but the court told you that. And that's a very, very important thing here. He told his story. He had his opportunities. He had his full opportunities to do all of that. And he came in here and lied to you and said he's here to get his reputation back. It's just one of many lies in this case, but it's a really big one, because here we are, 6 weeks of your time, precious time, 6 weeks of this court's time, for what? For nothing. Only to go after Amber. That's psychological abuse. He's going after Amber for nothing, because he wants to put her through this again, the third time. So we're fighting back, and that's the counterclaim. She finally has said enough, enough. And we're asking you to finally hold this man responsible. He has never accepted
look at
responsibility
Amber's
for anything
face.
in his life. You've heard it this whole time. He hasn't admitted
God.
anything. He's blamed everybody in the world, his agent, his manager, his lawyer, Amber, his friends, everybody. But he's never accepted responsibility for a thing he's done in his life. But we're asking you to accept, to make him accept responsibility, to hold him legally responsible for his actions, and to fully and fairly compensate Amber for what he has done by creating this concept of a hoax for the defamation that he has committed, that you have heard so much about, that just took wildfire and went off into negative media and has made Amber's life pure hell up to this day. We're asking you to do that, to compensate her, to be fair and hold him responsible so he stops. We don't want another lawsuit. We don't want anything else. We want to leave Amber alone and let her get on with her life and raise her child. So let's talk about the counterclaim for a moment. These are Adam Waldman's statements. You've heard Mr. Depp say, well, why aren't you suing Mr. Waldman? Isn't that typical of Mr. Depp? He doesn't take responsibility for anything. So now he's going to blame his lawyer. But the evidence is very clear on all three statements.
Wow, Elaine, wow.
That he says Adam Waldman, Mr. Depp's attorney, says these things. Now, Mr. Depp says, oh, I didn't even know about those until the counterclaim. Well, we know that's not true, because Mr. Waldman's testimony was 2 months before those statements were made. In February of 2020, Mr. Depp accompanied Mr. Waldman to the Daily Mail, the same place that all three of these statements were published. And he gave him 2 spliced audio tapes to try to make it look like Amber was the person who was committing the abuse. He went with him. He knew that Mr. Waldman was doing this. He knew that Mr. Waldman was launching a campaign against Amber to try to discredit her. And the timing of this, we're talking, the statements now are April and June of 2020. The trial is July of 2020. So they're launching an attack to try to discredit Amber before the trial in the UK. That's what happened here. And that is Mr. Waldman, but it's Mr. Depp. The judge gave you 3 different instructions, and you'll all have them. He's acting as his attorney. He has the authority. So Mr. Depp is standing in the shoes of Mr. Waldman. Mr. Waldman is standing in the shoes of Mr. Depp. Michelle, can you please bring up the first statement? It says, Amber and her friends in the media use fake sexual violence allegations as both a sword and shield, depending on their needs. They have selected some of her sexual violence hoax facts as the sword, inflicting them on the public and Mr. Depp. Now, what this statement is meant to imply is that Amber is lying about the sexual assaults and using them with the media to try to discredit Mr. Depp. That's the clear implications of this. Now, the first part of this is this contradicts Mr. Depp's claims today that the first time you ever heard about the sexual assaults that happened was in this case. It was in the UK case. This is the case that Mr. Depp brought in the UK. And instead of Amber Heard trying to put this out in the media, she did exactly the opposite. Now, this article's not in your evidence, but at least some of you will remember it being shown at one point with the title that said that Amber was successful in being able to treat her allegations of the sexual violence confidential in that proceeding. And it was treated confidential. She did exactly the opposite. She didn't want to tell people this. And you know that. You watched her on the stand. It was heart-rending for her to have to do this with the cameras, no less. But what else is false about this statement? It's that there was no false statements of sexual violence. Ben went through all four of them, and I will not repeat them all. You heard the testimony. And interestingly enough, you didn't hear any stories that differed from that with Mr. Depp. He didn't get on the stand and say, you know, no, this didn't happen, to at least a couple of them. And he can't in Australia. He can't remember anything, likely. But if you just look at the pictures of the destruction in that house, I mean, imagine painting those canvases and how long that took and how much hatred and rage you have to have for somebody to do something like that. Writing on the walls, tearing up her nightgown and wrapping pieces of raw steak and putting it all over the house. Remember that she also testified that he took her clothes and swiped them through all the paint before she left. You know these things happened. With respect to the malice on this one, you know he knows that he did these things. You know that he knows he was out of it for 3 days. And that's all that we need to prove for malice. But there's a couple of more facts here. But you can find whatever Mr. Waldman's done, and you can find whatever Mr. Depp has done. And both of those are the same for purposes of evaluating the verdict form. They stand in each other's shoes. When you have an agent, and that's what the jury instructions say, you can go with both. What did Mr. Waldman do? There was an article about the sexual violence that he had put from the April one that went into the trial. Amber's testimony, she was sitting near him in the trial. Adam Waldman threw that newspaper down in front of her defiantly. That's actual malice. And she was quite upset, and you heard her testimony on the stand about that. He was just inflicting it on her. Remember Bruce Whitkin's testimony. This was Johnny Depp's best friend for 40 years until he testified truthfully 4 years ago about the drugs and alcohol, and he stopped talking to him. There was a couple of really important things that Bruce Whitkin said. One of the things he said, he met Adam Waldman once. Adam Waldman said, "Do you have any dirt on the Mandels?" And he said no, and that was it. Then he didn't care. He is an attack dog. All he wants to do is attack and put dirt on people. The second thing that Whitkin said that I think was pretty instructive was that Johnny Depp has deep-seated anger issues that have nothing to do with Amber. He remembered even back when Johnny was married to his sister-in-law, he had extreme jealousy even back then. And I think that's pretty significant. Remember, Mr. Whitkin also was called in a few times to intercede in some of these fights between Johnny and Amber when he would become so angry. The last thing I thought he said that was actually pretty important was that Kipper and his whole group are a scam. He said, you know, how is it that they can be sober doctors, you know, for these years, and he's never sober. You know, he's even taking pot all the time. How can you be sober? I thought that was quite instructive. But in any event, going back to, that's the first statement. The second statement, Michelle, if you can bring that one up. Oh, before I go there, I want to talk about a few more things from Mr. Waldman that you have in your pocket to be able to find additional malice with him. Remember, he's the one that after the UK trial went to the LAPD with a notebook full of things and tried to get perjury charges against Amber. The LAPD said, we don't investigate those things. But he then went to a German newspaper and said, Amber is being investigated by the NYPD or the LAPD for perjury. Do you remember that? That's malice. That's showing his intent to do harm to Amber. He also admitted that he speaks to that umbrella guy, and you'll see that one text in there from the person from TMZ. That umbrella guy is the big lead of Johnny Depp's, positive social media that is putting all the negative out on Amber Heard. And he also ended up getting knocked out of Twitter because he was abusing Amber. So now we'll go to the second counterclaim statement. And that is quite simply, this was an ambush, a hoax. They set Mr. Depp up by calling the cops, but the first attempts didn't do the trick. The officers came to the penthouses, thoroughly searched and interviewed, and left after seeing no damage to face or property. So Amber and her friends spilled a little wine, roughed the place up, got their story straight under the direction of a lawyer and publicist, then placed a second call to 911. Now this is May 21. Now, the clear
it's all made up. It was all pre-planned.
Together with her friends, they decided they were going to set Johnny up to be charged for domestic violence, and so they called the police and they tried to make up this whole story,
or she did,
get him arrested. But the police said there's no evidence here, and went away. And they said, "Darn." And so they spilled wine and they, busted up the place, and they called 911. They got advice from a lawyer and a publicist, called 911 and tried again to get Johnny charged. That's what this says. Now, we all know that's false, and it's heinously false. Because, after these events happened, and Ben talked about a little bit of it, but I'll talk about the rest of it, and I'm going to try to do it really quickly. But we all know Amber did everything in her power not to tell them who Johnny was, not to press charges, not to have him arrested. The exact opposite of this. But what were the facts of May 21st? He comes over, he's already been drinking, he's already high, and he is on a tear about feces in the bed from a month ago. And remember how Amber talked about when he gets into these drug-induced things, he gets into these paranoias, and he gets some idea in his head, and he just won't let it go. And that was his this time. There's somebody put that feces in the bed a month ago. That was his spin. So she gets Io Tillett on the phone. He's in New York at the time. He's going, they thought, this is ridiculous. Of course nobody did. And by the way, Boo has this huge problem. Of course it was Boo. He's always doing this. But Johnny just won't get there. So then they laugh. That makes him mad. Then he throws the phone at Amber. Amber screams out and says, "Ow, you just threw the cell phone at me. It hurts." Io says, "Amber, get out of there." Johnny gets madder, pulls her hair, grabs her and starts hitting her. So Io gets hold of Rocky Pennington. She comes over as quickly as she can. She goes and gets in between the two of them. She puts her hands up on his chest. He pushes them down. And then she continues to stand in between them. And he's screaming loudly 10 times, "Amber, get the fuck up. Amber, get the fuck up. Amber, get the fuck up." Loudly, loudly. Then his bodyguards hear this, they come in, they break it up. That's how that happens. But the next part of this, remember Josh Drew, and I think Elizabeth Mars was amazing in this one. Remember their testimony? After that, he goes and he has to, he always leaves a path of destruction as he's leaving. So he, bashes up things, and you saw Ben's pictures here on the picture frames, knocks things over as he's going. Goes down the hallway, he's splashing the wine. He gets his bodyguards to let him into penthouse 5. That's where Josh and Elizabeth are trying to help with Rocky's bead thing for the next day. And he comes in, storming in, and he says, "Get your bitch out of here." And he's got the big magnum, and he's mad. And Elizabeth is just terrified. She barely knows Johnny. She's met him 4 times, and she goes ripping out of there as fast as she can. And Josh gets out of there too. Then what does he do? He rearranges the furniture, or he might have knocked something off, one of the countertops or something, I think is the testimony of his bodyguards. But you saw the pictures. He went through and trashed that place again as he left. Now, the next part of this is the police coming. Io calls the police. He's in New York. He calls the New York Police 911. He's afraid they're not going to get there fast enough. He still remembers December 15 because he came in afterwards and saw all of the injuries on Amber and all the evidence. And he's terrified that Amber's still in there, the police haven't come, and that Johnny's going to kill her. So he calls a friend in LA and says, please call 911. We got to get somebody there fast. So she calls 911. So we have 2 calls, and you'll see the call summary. And the call summary shows those 2 calls really close in proximity here. So it's not them, we didn't get the first police officer, so we'll rough up the place and make a second one. You'll see that they're like 8 minutes apart up there. But it took 2 hours to dispatch the 2 different ones, and Amber never even had any idea that the second one was coming. The first one's come. And, we've talked about it. We've shown you the pictures. The police officers admitted that those pictures could very much have been what was there that night. Remember, Officer Haddon, it was his first week on the job. Officer Science was three years on the job at that point. They say, they told Josh that if she will press charges, if she'll give a name, we can file a report and make an arrest. She wouldn't do it. You did hear from Detective Sandanaga. That's the domestic violence.
All right, we just went silent. I don't know why. Let me see. Okay.
You recall Josh Drew saying that the police officer told him, she'll give a name, we'll make an arrest. He definitely said that. But in any event, she would not cooperate. She didn't want to. But Detective Sandanaga, their domestic relations or domestic violence person, said they should have done an incident report no matter what, even if they decided there wasn't a crime. Because domestic violence has the cycles, they come back, and it's good to have the record for the next time that it might happen. So she said they should have under the circumstances, even if they didn't. And she also said that when they put verbal dispute only in those calls, it is a code that they use, and you'll see that it's twice on that call report. So to say that's why we didn't write a report. But in any event, whether the police officers, forgot about it 2 months later when they were first asked about it, whether they just decided she's never going to press charges, and you'll see on the call report they're insisting that to the second set, it doesn't make any difference. The point is, this is still false. This statement is still false because Amber did everything but try to press charges against Johnny Depp. So they go away. And the testimony is that Josh and Amber and Rocky cleaned up because they have dogs. So they cleaned up a lot of the glass and the wine and those types. They had no idea the second police officers were coming by, and they certainly didn't call them, and they certainly didn't talk. They never talked to a publicist. She talked to a lawyer who gave her advice, and that's why she wouldn't tell them, anything. She said, I'm not going to cooperate at all. So the second one's coming. You saw that. You've got the video cameras in there. You see, there's no effort by them to try to get now these officers to press charges against Johnny Depp. Just the opposite. Josh Drew doesn't want to even let him in the place. They come through quickly. Everything's fine. They wave. Everything's fine. Are they trying to press charges against Johnny? No. They're not trying to do anything. They're trying to get him out of there, which makes this statement 100% false. Was it made with malice? Absolutely. There's nobody that thinks that Amber tried to press charges that night. Johnny knew that. But the other thing that's very helpful and what you should look at is Defendants Exhibits 772 and 773. Because once again, the next day, Johnny apologizes to Amber. He says in 2 different text messages at 772 and 773, he says, my profound apologies in one of them, and my apologies are eternal in the other one. What is he apologizing for the next day on May 22nd if he didn't know that he did all of those things? And by the way, remember Isaac Baruch even remembers the wine in the hallway. None of the police officers remember the wine. And that's because they're busy and they got a zillion other things going, and they didn't remember this call 2 months later when they were asked about it. So that's the next one. So clearly, that's 100% false. Clearly, they knew it. Clearly, there's malice in making that statement. They're trying to suggest that she's manufacturing evidence with her friends to try to frame Mr. Depp. Nothing could be further from the truth on that one. And she did not want those police officers to press charges. Now, let's go to the third one. Oh, and let's talk about the makeup just for a moment while we're going to the third one. This makeup thing, fresh face, natural. These were Adam Waldman planting these when he talked to the ECB people. You know, remember the testimony here. We kept asking, so did you talk to Mr. Waldman? Did you talk to Mr. Waldman? Mr. Waldman was trying to plant in all of these people's minds.
Objection, Your Honor.
Somehow, she wasn't.
Did he approach?
Oh, they're approaching. They're approaching, which means we get more court silence. Here we go. Let's see if we can fast forward.
With makeup.
Oh. Okay, I think we're almost there.
So I didn't
There we
say
go.
that any of
God,
the
it took a
witnesses
while.
admitted that Adam Waldman
Sorry,
planted
guys.
that. I'm saying he planted it. That's me arguing the planting. And that's because it's all the same thing. She wasn't wearing any makeup. She was natural. She wasn't wearing a stitch of makeup. Every one of them says it. It's the exact same thing. Well, why would you say that? She's an actor. She's not going to go outside her house, you know, without putting makeup on. And if she has bruises, why on earth, when she's been covering them up for 4 years, why on earth would she not put makeup on so that she would cover those up? Why on earth would she not want to cover up those bruises? It makes no sense. But you know what? You guys saw her here. You saw Amber on the stand. There were days where she didn't wear eye makeup. A lot of people think that she's not wearing makeup when she doesn't have mascara and eyeliner on. She has different looks, and some of them are with eye makeup and some of them are without. And people misunderstand, especially people that aren't that good at makeup, and a lot of men, frankly, go, oh, then she probably doesn't have makeup. And that's where that mistake happens. But you heard her testimony, and you heard her makeup artist testimony saying she doesn't go out of her room without concealer and foundation. She knows how to put these things in. And you saw Defendant's Exhibit 155, and you'll have the actual thing in there. That's the type of palette she used. And she was very adept at telling you what color she puts on for the different days of bruises. This is a woman who for 4 years did everything she could to cover up anybody knowing anything about this abuse. Do you honestly think she's just going to walk around for the week with her bruises exposed? Of course she's not. Now, let's go to the third one. And this is the abuse hoax. He says, we've reached the beginning of the end of Ms. Heard's abuse hoax against Johnny Depp. Now, obviously the defamatory meaning of that is that Amber's creating an abuse hoax, but there is no abuse hoax. I don't need to tell you all of the evidence because Ben did a beautiful job of just taking you through all of those different things, but I will point out a couple things for you. And that is, remember Bonnie Jacobs, the therapist. Dr. Hughes and Dr. Spiegel testified about Bonnie Jacobs' notes. And remember that I was holding that, you don't get to see them, but they testified that they went through them. Dr. Hughes testified that she also spoke with Bonnie Jacobs. She kept contemporaneous notes from 2011 when she first started seeing Amber. And the abuse is documented in those notes, is what Dr. Hughes testified to. They start in 2012, both physical and sexual
Objection, Your Honor.
That Dr. Hughes
Admit-
testified to that.
More quiet time in court, as I call it. I call it court quiet time. Yeah. Um, let me see if I can fast forward through this. Okay, let me see. This is being very weird. Okay, here we go.
Dr. Bonnie Jacobs notes as reflecting both contemporaneous physical abuse and sexual abuse throughout that time period. Dr. Spiegel confirmed that later and said the same. When I asked Dr. Curry if she had reviewed those notes, she said yes, but she had no comment. And she
Your Honor,
didn't
objection.
acknowledge that was in there.
Oh my god, are they approaching again? Jesus.
And sexual abuse throughout that time period. Dr. Spiegel confirmed that later and said the same. When I asked Dr. Curry if she had reviewed those notes, she said yes, but she had no comment. And she
Your Honor,
didn't
objection.
acknowledge that was in there.
Again, more quiet time. Come on.
She even realized before. She always had thought that it had started in 2013. When she went back and saw Bonnie Jacobs' notes, she realized that it had started much earlier, and she was very embarrassed by that. Now, significantly, you remember that she testified about how she was first called upon to actually detail all of her events of abuse in February of this year. And she went through and took the notes, took photos, she took everything she had, calendars, everything, put it all together, and you heard about at least 64 pages of detailed accountability of that. And Mr. Depp's team has been able to not refute any of that. Remember, they tried to impeach her and say, well, you didn't say that. She said, yes, I did, on page 64. Remember that? It was a very, very difficult process for her because there was an awful lot of it, and she put it in great detail. Now, let's talk for a moment about the motive. They have said that she has created this whole hoax, and I think Ben's done a nice job of showing how that can't possibly have been. But what would Amber Heard's motive be for creating the hoax or creating any of this or making any of this up? That's a big question here. They call her a gold digger, right? But she obviously couldn't have done it for the money because, first of all, remember the testimony of Laura Wasser, the divorce attorney. She said that California is a no-fault state and community property. So Amber doesn't have to have an abuse. She could have divorced him for irreconcilable differences, for abandonment, for adultery, for anything. She doesn't need an excuse. And she gets 50% of whatever he earns during the time of the marriage, unless they had a prenup or a postnup. The testimony from Michelle Mulrooney was that Amber completely cooperated with the prenup and the postnup, but it was Johnny Depp who, and you've already heard from Ben, he called her up and fired her. He didn't want a postnup or a prenup. So she's entitled to 50% of everything he earns during that time. Now we have Plaintiff's Exhibit 936 in evidence. And look at page 69. It says how much he made in 2015. It was $43 million. Remember Mr. Spindler, Depp's expert, who said that he made $22 million in 2016. So you got $65 million. Amber was entitled to 31.5 at least. That doesn't include all the back ends from, for example, Pirates 5. She was entitled to that money. So she didn't need to say anything. She could have just said, I don't like you anymore. I don't like the color of your hair. I'm going to divorce you.
Your
She would have
Honor,
been
we're
entitled
going
to
to
that.
object again.
Another objection. Okay.
Donation. But both the corporate
She's back.
designees for ACLU and for Children's Hospital said donation and pledge are interchangeable. You know, these are pledges.
Donation
The
and pledge are
ACLU
two
corporate
different
designee said,
things.
you typically do pledges because of the tax benefits. And that's what she said. She pledged it over a period of time because of the tax implications to it and because she was getting paid over the time. Now, she started to make these donations, and you'll see that the first one was on behalf of Mr. Depp's business manager, Mr. White, actually sent the letters with the $100,000 for each of those. That was the initial ones. He was trying to take credit for those, and in fact, both the ACLU and Children's Hospital got confused and gave the credit to Mr. Depp, not to Amber, for those. Then she made payments to both, and Elon Musk also made payments to both for $500,000 each, which she didn't count to her pledge, but they helped those organizations. At the end of the day, she's made $1 million in payments to them, but then she got sued here and hasn't been able to because she spent $6 million in attorney's fees. That is unrefuted. She still intends to pay those pledges, honor those pledges, and she said that throughout. And I elicited from both the ACLU and from Children's Hospital, they haven't expired. She can pay them whenever she wants to, and she fully intends to. But she has to get out from under this first. Now, who would blame a woman for giving $1 million in charitable donations? Who would do that? That sounds like psychological abuse to me. Now, Mr. Mandel testified that Johnny Depp is not a charitable person and he hasn't written any big checks for him. Mr. Depp got on the stand and says he does it anonymously, but Mr. Mandel would have been the one writing the checks, and he says that didn't happen. Now let's go to damages, because I promised you I was going to go pretty fast here. There's a few different types of damages, but one of the things that the court has talked to you about, she told you that because we have defamation, it's invidious, and therefore it's very difficult to prove these. And so these damages to business reputation, inconvenience, embarrassment are presumed. You don't have to prove those damages. And one great example of that
Oh God,
is the
Elaine,
testimony
just
from
listening
Mr.
to her
Hamada
is
at Warner Brothers.
so annoying.
He didn't
Oh my
want
God,
to
do you guys
have to get
hear
in the
that?
middle of all of this with Aquaman 2. They
Motorcycle
haven't even
driving
released
by.
it.
Crazy.
So he didn't read anything in preparation for his deposition. He didn't talk to anybody before his deposition. He said that he tried to do technicals and say, no, we never terminated her contract. But, oh yeah, we did tell her we were probably not going to renew her option. And then we didn't change the script, but Amber got the script, and yes, they did change it. Then he said, no, we never negotiate salaries, but oh yeah, we did renegotiate Jason Momoa's and Gal Gadot's. So he just doesn't want to admit to any of these things. But what came out in Hamada's deposition, and I hope you were listening carefully to this, was
Hello, and
from James Wan,
welcome.
the
Join me
director,
on
and
screen by
James
clicking the link
Jason
in the
Momoa,
pinned
her
comment
co-star, who
in
said
the
they
chat.
guarantee
It's
if they are in
StreamYard.
the
We
film,
can discuss
she is
the
going to be
case.
Mara in the film. Why
Yes.
would they do that unless they thought Warner Brothers
Make
was
sure you
being
hit the
unfair
like
to her?
button and subscribe.
And why did she get almost knocked out of it? Because of the defamatory statements. When they came out, they took on a life of their own. Ron Schnell, the young Sheldon, I call him the Doogie Howser, our expert on IT, took you through and tracked how they tracked the defamatory statements, the language from the defamatory statements, how that went through the social media and the negative social media. And it kept going and kept going. And he tracked all the way until a few months ago, over 2.36 million negative communities, but for the punitive damages, and we would ask that you award that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and we are done with that. All right, guys. So this was fun. I had a lot of fun with this today. I don't know if I will come back today to finish up the rebuttal closing arguments, but I might, who knows. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button, the thumbs up, like button. Please hit the subscribe below and the notification bell. Also, you can find me on Instagram. It's at George Mansour, Mansour. Sorry, give me a sec. Right there, George. It's at George Mansour, my name, 831, or it's at PC Blabber. All right, thank you. Bye.